From praying to Boulders for berries. We had all fallen asleep in the kitchen. We did this regularly at the time. It's impossible to lie in bed when starving. I was on the floor, Reuben at my side, sharing a blanket. Mother was in her chair with Dorcas across her thighs. We needed to be together in one room, or else we'd feel crushed by the emptiness in the house. Middle of the night, we awoke to the creaking of door hinges. Silver dust glistened in all our eyes. Mother's face was nearest the window. She was ghostly. I couldn't look at her face any longer. Hunger was hollowing her. I shut my eyes, but the light of the moon wouldn't drown away. Mother's face was in me. I had seen her dead. The wind often pushed the door open, so I thought nothing of it, hoping Mother would shut it or else tell me to. Reuben sat up and rubbed his eyes. He stared at the open door. There was no wind and no time for me to think a prayer had been answered. Soft golden light poured into the entrance. Skipper Malcolm spoke as he stepped in. "Thought I'd bring you this from the store, mate." He had a stone of flour under one arm. "I knows the end of winter is a long and hungry time," he said to Mother. I wanted to jump into his arms, but knew better than to come out of my blanket. Mother was not one to accept charity. She would scold me for pitying myself that way, for acting like a lucky beggar. I expected she'd speak abruptly to him, saying she's not the beholden sort, saying we'd be fine. I was wrong. She said nothing. She looked out the window. She looked down at her sleeping daughter. Vacant eyes. She mumbled something, I don't know what. Skipper shut the door and placed the flour and his lantern on the table. He stepped towards her. She would not look up. He bent low and rubbed her shoulder. In a low, stern voice I could barely hear, he said, "Don't you be like that. Don't you get down on yourself. You knows damn well you're worth more than that." His back caught the lantern's golden light. Her face was still dusted by the cold moon. "You look up," he said. But she wouldn't. He lifted her chin in his palm. She wouldn't open her eyes. "You always look up, love. This is not your fault. You can be proud." Still, she would not open her eyes, and she would not let her tears fall. Her eyelids quivered with them. I wanted to yell at her and slap her and hold her. I could only stare as she sank inside Skipper's broad shadow, his golden back filling the room. Their breathing frosted the window. Mother hadn't been touched in years. I needed him to kiss her. I needed him to do what Father could do and I couldn't. I needed him to lift her up in his arms and hold her. I wanted to see her arm draped over the shoulder of a man. But he wouldn't, and she wouldn't. He turned from her, his hand taking up the lantern. He opened the door to step out, but turned toward me with a wink and a half smile. I smiled, but it was not easy. It hurt. I regret looking sad because I was grateful. He was gone before I could write my lips. I kept trying to get my mouth to do the right thing, even after he'd shut the door. But it wouldn't. I kept trying to right myself, but instead broke open. It was a heavy cry. I wanted to drop all of Mother's hard tears, too. From Turning In. He takes up the chunk in his spoon. It is as wide as his mouth. He mashes it with his gums and tongue, his cheeks pressing it back in through gaps in his teeth. He wants this to happen more slowly than it can. His shoulders arch forward. His eyelids fold over the dulled eyes that drown behind them. He slips inside the memory of an old man who no longer bothers with simple evening chatter. Savoring his turnip chunk, He runs off into sleep and lands inside a cobblestone corridor leading along stone walls into a fish market. He is floating into the heart of Aveiro, into a time long gone. Stacks of dried salt cod are loaded in wooden mule-drawn carts. He sees sealed puncheon tubs packed with fish, St. John's, Newfoundland, written across each of them. The smell of salt fish washing down his lungs, he breathes deeply, relaxed, with knowing well his way around this country of sleep. He still holds most of the turnip between his cheeks, puckers up and swallows a bit. It smooths to cream down his throat, and he's off again, this time riding bareback along hills that roll high above the sea, his nostrils flaring to take in a cloud of mare musk. Her eyes are the black hearts of flowers, and he looks into them, resting his bare chest on her head. His ribs thump over her skull. His face is awash in her steam. She is named Flurry. He knows her well. His father worked her in the bush all through his childhood, hauling logs through snow he could get lost in for days. They are riding, thumping along, bodies barely held together. Barking down a tree. First, cut into the bark. Use your axe starting about 6 feet above the ground and notch a line down the trunk. Straight line, soft cut, not like opening the gut of a fish. Cut only the skin of the tree. After this, cut rings right around the tree at the top and bottom of your line. That done, put your axe aside and work the bark open with your hands. You'll be unsnapping buttons down the backside of a long gown. Work your fingers under the bark, against the wet wood, into the cool milky sap. In no time, your fingers will be inside the tree, your palms pressed flat against the fragrant wood, fresh as bathed skin. The rest is easy. Slide your hands farther in until your fingertips are touching each other on the backside of the trunk. The rare tree is tant and thick enough that your chest and neck and face will be flat against the sweat of pine, more sweet-smelling than fruit. You'll be holding the tree, feeling hugged against its flesh, within its bark. Now, work your arms down the full height of the cut, 6 feet or more. The gown peels off. When you step away from the tree, you'll be holding a rind of bark like a cassock of hard skin as tall as you are, maybe taller. Stack the rinds in bundles of 10 and pile them all in your punt. With a full load, haul home. They will roof your stores and tilts, your homes, even insulate walls. But they will mostly be used to cover the cod from rain, lengths folded over piles of drying fish and held down by the weight of stones. Stripped, the trees dry up over summer. In late fall, return to your cut lot and take down the standing dead. Haul them home and chop them into splits. All winter, feed your stove. Best hand ever. I was grateful when I got my hand inside her skirt. She was not convinced. She needed to know I was a man, not a boy getting lucky, dealt the wild card after betting a bluff. There was no bluff. Both of us knew we weren't in the game for love. Not at first. There were no lies between us. I played like the joker, but she was the wild card. It started with her brushing against my shoulder with a breast that outweighed my arm. At church and on the wharf and in the post office, current stirred in our eyes. When we collided on Cemetery Hill that night, wildflowers were making their way out of the dirt. We lay in cold spring grass, the smell of her neck too sweet for the rough ground. But in her mouth, in our mouths, breath was lively as fresh moss. I pressed my hands over her breasts, while the moon glistened in her black hair. I watched her breathe, her eyes closed, the frost of the cooling night, shimmering in the moonlit air, entombed us. We were sparkles in black marble. I moved my hand up her woolen legging, slowing to circle her kneecap, before pushing on with my palm against her thigh. When my fingers pressed against her passage, the scent and feel of lips opening made my eyes roll back. And that's when she shut down the game. "No more," she said. "Not without a promise." I had to fold on the spot. I had been played. I didn't bother with the big question. I simply said, "Yes, love." She said, "You see the preacher in the morning?" I did, bright and early, before he'd even thought of saying his morning prayer. I was back in the game then, with a fresh deck. Now we were partners, joker and wild card, wed as wildflowers reached full bloom. Fatty me mommy. I looked Fatty into the eyes, and I looked into her eyes because they are big ones, and I can see my head in there, and I am round-headed like a ball, and I like to see my head round like that because it's funny. And since Mommy went into the sky, I live in that house here, but Uncle is a grumbler. It doesn't talk to me very good, and has a tight face on his skin, and all I do to Auntie is make her lips get hard, and she has 2 big yellow tooths in her mouth that stinks, and when she looks at me with her mouth, when she yells at me, she wants to bite me with her yellow tooths, and I wish the boy Lucians could be good, but he bangs the rabbits, and pulls their ears in his hands, and makes them go round real fast, and sometimes lets go, but rabbits don't fly, so there can be blood on the rocks, and once on my dress on Sunday, because the boy Lucians hit me on the back with the rabbits, and Auntie smacked me in the face because the blood is on my dress, but no one wants to listen, because Auntie says my daddy was the devil. But I don't know that, and that's why I always talk to Fatty, because I can't let myself be nice to the boy Lucians. But Fatty has bigger legs than me, and I can touch the funny snakes inside there when I can push on the snake to make it go empty. And when I let go of my finger, the snake fills up again with the white blood. But blood is red, so Fatty has milk in her legs, and that's why she's so fat, because she has lots of milk in her belly bag. And that's why I like to put my hands, because they can get cold, and her belly bag is hot and has skin like my belly, but I don't have funny fingers on my belly bag, so that's why when Uncle has gone away on the water, I can get under her belly bag and play with her fingers, and sometimes I can get thirsty under her, and Fatty is happy when I look her in the eyes and play with her funny fingers. That's how come I know she doesn't bite me when she kisses me, because I used to think her yellow tooths could be like Auntie's tooths, and that's how come she kisses me with her nose, so I'm not afraid. But that makes my face stink, and I don't want to like my stinky face, but I like Fatty, so Auntie can hit me if she needs to not make my face stink like her face stinks when Fatty lifts her tail, and I can make stinkies too, but not good like Fatty, because I don't have a tail, and my stinkies aren't green, not yet, but one day I want a tail like Fatty, so I can have a little sister pull it, and she can look me in the eye and see her face in me, and if the boy Lucians comes yelling, holding the rabbits by the ears, she can hide behind me, because Fatty doesn't like the boy Lucians and his rabbits, and one time he put his gun to Fatty's eye, but she didn't look at him, and I was crying, and he yelled at me, bang! But Fatty is bigger than the rabbits, so the boy Lucians had to push me into the dirt. But Fatty looked at me and said it's okay, because the boy Lucians is smaller than she is, and big people don't understand that much. So that's how come I really don't like to watch when Uncle hits her belly bag, because his hands are mean, and sometimes they hit me. But Fatty can moo and lift her tail and make a stinky when she doesn't like Uncle to pull her fingers and to yell at her, because she's not stupid, and nobody listens to Fatty. And when Uncle and the boy Lucians couldn't bring her to the wharf today because they pulled at her head and hit her with the wood on the big bum and told her she was stupid, I had to go see her when Uncle pulled me by the arm and made me walk her to the wharf, where I tried to kiss her and tell her everybody is smaller than she is, and then I could only see she in the eyes when Auntie put me in her arms near her tooths, and the boy Lucians yelled at me, bang, with his gun, and at Fatty again, and laughed at me and Fatty, and now Auntie put me in the room under the stairs and told me to stay here or she can hit me real bad, so now I have Grumpy in my arms, but he can't talk like Fatty, and I know Fatty wanted to kiss me with her nose, and so I kissed Grumpy because he's a nice bear, and Mommy made him with Daddy's clothes, and I like my Mommy's pillow, and that's why I want to go see Fatty, because I miss Mommy, and I want Mommy to see Fatty so she can tell her where the sky is, and that way Fatty can take me to Mommy, because Mommy's not here, and now I miss Fatty, and I want my Mommy. On my knees in the flowers. Yes, I'm crying. It does make me cry. Not ashamed of it. No, sir, you spend 52 years, every summer on your knees along the Labrador, and you'll know what it means to see a potato flower. First time I seen this since I was 8 years old. First time I get to stand in a spring garden since I was a boy. I remember being in the garden with Mother. That's more than 60 years gone, and yet no farther away than yesterday. That memory of Mother, and the same of Sister, too. I saw potatoes flower then. Oh, but you forget it. You have to spend your life with your face in fish guts to know what it means. Never mind that. It's not so bad as it could have been. Sure, now I live alone. Audrey's gone, love of my life. But I still keeps her by my side. It's not like you can just let go of someone like her. I know she's dead. I don't need no photo to remind me of that. I know she's gone, but she's still here, too. It don't matter if you don't see her. I do, and it's not foolishness either. You can't imagine what she'd done for me. She used to cut up her nightgown when it got worn, cut up all that lovely material and sew it into the knees of my long underwear, on the insides of them. I started work as a salter, see, in the hold along with my father since I was 9 year old. And the salter is the worst of the jobs. I knows 'cause I done 'em all. Header for a long time and splitter, too. But more than 40 years I salted. And in the year I first come home to my new lovely wife, someone finally saw how it was like for me, how bad it was on my knees. See, Mother had passed on when I was 9 year old. Tuberculosis took Sister, too. After that, I had nobody to be tender to me, not till I met my Audrey. Father was good enough, but not a soft man. Men weren't soft then. And he never married again. Audrey cried, she did. Yes, she did, when she saw me the first fall I come home. She could hardly look at how raw and scarred my knees were, cut and beaten. The skin was burned by salt, and looked no better than fish meat. Imagine 18 hours of the day kneeling on rough wood, your legs soaked in brine like pig's feet. Imagine how that felt. You can't. Blisters and cuts and slivers, all soaking in fish brine the whole summer long. The next year, and every year after that, more than 30 of them, she kept my knees safe in her nightgowns. That's what she done. That's the way she was, Audrey was. Little patterns of flowers, soft as pillows, to keep my knees from being torn open, from being burned by the salt. So now you know why little flowers get to me, why they make me cry, even the little potato ones. They make you cry. Not ashamed of it. The man in the parlour. Come in. He's in the parlour, she says excitedly, opening the door for you. Now you are inside her kitchen. She is standing alone near the Waterloo stove, waiting for the kettle to rumble. And then there is nobody in the house with her, not even you. She can barely understand the thought of that she is alone, a widow, and has been for most of her life. She spends her time near the window, following the clouds that pattern the sky, or losing herself in the crystals that gather and melt over the glass. Only the whistling steam out of the kettle plugs the hole in time. She does not remember the marriage with a second husband that lasted 3 times longer than the first. She only remembers the one who got inside her heart. She sits at her table, leaning on her elbows, holding a saucer and the cup that was steaming in the sunlight only a moment ago. Faithfully, she watches the sun rise. She sits in the same place with her shoulders hunched at day's end and doesn't see it set behind the house, blackening the hill. She awaits the moon. Her shoulders will lift when it comes, if only a little. Some nights she stands on her porch to share the night with it. She is always so still, you might think she listens to stars talking across the water. She enters the parlour as though guiding someone there. "He looks smart, doesn't he?" she says pleasantly to no one, gesturing at a coffin laid out along the easterly wall under the large window. "Come in and see Darius," she says. "He's in the parlour. Go on now, it'll do you some good to see him again." Every day she reaches over the coffin and raises its lid. With dry eyes, cupping his cheek with her hand, she feels him. He is silent. "You're such a smart looker, Darius. You always were." Screams of children chasing each other under windows, disputes and conversations filling the jar of night. She reacts to none of it, never opens the window to the calling of her name. She barely understands that Rosalind, the large woman with the auburn hair and an apron whom you saw entering the kitchen yesterday, is the one who usually brings her fresh bread and soup and asks, "How is you today, Molly?" She always replies, "Come in, my love. He's in the parlour. It's good of you to bring the bread. I'm sure it'll do us all some good. Oh, and soup, too. You didn't have to do that, maid." And when it isn't Rosalind, it's either Janey or Flora or you. Today, staying for tea with your elbows gently settled on the table, your hands rub the hands of poor widow Molly Tiller, cupping them as they quiver. Her words are few, and you have heard them often. "So happy you could come, my love. Wait till you see how smart he looks in his suit. He's in the parlour." You go in because there are days when you crave the cold fear it takes to make a woman believe in impossible things, like love that won't ever fade. And you go to be reminded that your own man's casket could just as easily show up inside your home. He too could drown. Any given day he could. You return to hold her hands and see yourself in her emptied eyes, standing there with Gid and Richard, your brothers, warning you with the same words she heard on that day. "Don't you open the casket, love. He's just not in there. He's gone now, love. He's gone for good."